Welcome everyone to We Are Triathletes webinar series. I'm Hillary Topper, and I have with me Coach Tim Dells of CB Multisport and the head coach of We Are Triathletes. Talk to us a little bit about how many yards you should get up to in your training when you're doing a sprint, Olympic, half, and full Ironman.
Sure. So swimming is unique out of the three sports that we have to participate in. It has the least amount of physical impact on your body. You know, there's no impact involved. You're suspended in water. You're not taking a pounding, things like that. It's also the fastest to recover from because it's the least abusive. So typically in swimming, I want my athletes to train to get above the distance that they will be racing at, if possible. If you're a first timer, or if it's your first time at a particular distance, you know, the numbers can be kind of terrifying and intimidating, and that's okay. We've all been there and done that. So if that is your situation, you do want to try to get to at least the distance, or very, you know, as close to it as you can before the race. Also consider that typically you'll be wearing a wetsuit in your race, so the distance will feel much harder in the pool than it will on race day. So like in the case of a sprint, the distances vary anywhere, typically from, like, if it's a pool sprint, it could be 300 yards up to the standard distance is a half a mile. Right. So in that case, you know, you obviously want to train accordingly. I would tell people to try, like, for a sprint, I would use a number of like 1,000 yards as kind of a baseline. Even if you're only doing 300, doing 1,000 in the pool over the course of a workout isn't an absurd number to reach for. You know, when you start to get into long course and you're talking about like an Ironman, which is 4,200 yards, telling people to do 4,000 in the pool, I get a lot of grief and pushback on that. So in that case, I tend to try to unless they're a swimmer with a swimmer's background or someone who's really efficient in the water, then I would usually cap those people at around 4,000. Just because, like I said, having the wetsuit on and being in the race with a group of people, those extra 270 yards or whatever it is will come a lot easier on race day than it will in the pool.
So I want to talk about both pool swimming and open water. And for pool swimming, right, what would you say is the most efficient or effective drill? There's so many drills out there. So which one is the best?
There are tons of drills, and most of them have a good purpose to them. But the thing is, it really depends on what are your deficiencies in the pool. Like, I mean, I'm a decent swimmer. I didn't grow up swimming. But, you know, I swim Olympics in the 23, 24 minute range. You know, I'm by no means a superstar swimmer, but I'm, you know, in the front part of the pack. But what I do for drills is based on my deficiencies in the water, of which I have many. So it really depends. Most triathletes do not kick at all, you know, or they kick very much, and it's just for balance, which is okay. I hardly ever kick when I'm in a wetsuit unless I'm trying to accelerate or get away from people or, you know, whatever. But because most people don't kick, and because most people run way more than they swim, your ankles tend to be very, very tight. And so swimming with tight ankles is like swimming with an anchor. If your toes are pointed towards the bottom of the pool deck, you're dragging yourself through the swim. So even with knowing nothing about someone's form, having them do drills with fins on is just great from a mobility and flexibility standpoint. And kicking is the most overlooked thing in the sport. The second drill, which applies more to your actual swimming style, is that I call it quick swimming. It's not really an official drill, but what I find is most amateurs swim way too slow in terms of how fast they turn their arms over. There is this misconception called gliding, right? And gliding is more efficient, and gliding makes you faster, and is, you know, kind of these buzzwords. Gliding is great because you can do it in a pool, right? There's no current, there's no chop, there's no anything. And it does make the swimming easier because you're taking less strokes. However, if you watch any quote unquote real swimmer, they never glide. They turn their arms over faster than everyone else. Now, I can't expect my athletes to turn their arms over like Andy Potts, who was an Olympic swimmer before a triathlete. But most people's turnover is way too low. So what I tell my athletes to do for this quick swim is, instead of entering the water and then when people glide, they kind of do one of these things, is when you enter the water, go right into your catch. Okay, instead of going out, go down with your arm to engage the water. So you're essentially shortening your stroke. Longer strokes are good, but they should be done coming over the top and not through the water. So if we can get people to pick up their turnover of their arms, you'll gain speed instantly. Then we can extend the length of the reach going into the water, as opposed to getting in the water and then trying to reach.
So what's the drill that you would suggest there, just
So,
to keep your arms, to do it a quicker turnover?
So the easiest way to do it is, I tell people, get in the pool and warm up, you know, because you want to be loose. And then just do 2 lengths down the pool, so 50 yards, you know, down and back. And while you're doing that, count how many strokes you take. And then what I want you to do is, say you did, I don't know, the average number is like 22 strokes a length, 22, 23 is about average. So say you did 22, and that's 44. Well, now I want you to do 23 on each length. So 46, and then 24. And we just kind of step it up a little bit at a time to get you used to turning your arms over. Because once we get you turning over and engaging water early, then when I get you to reach, the total strokes go down, but you're grabbing water as soon as you hit the water. You know, your hand is engaging as soon as you hit. So it's called people call it the golf drill, you know, where it's all about, are you shooting high or low? So try to add a stroke each length until you get your turnover up, and then we'll stretch you out.
So you also talked a little bit about fins, right? A lot of people, I love using fins. To me, I feel like they keep my bodies pretty level, right?
Yep.
When I'm in a pool. But a lot of people think that it's cheating. Is it cheating to use fins in a pool?
It depends on the purpose. I don't think you should get in and swim with fins as part of your normal workout all the time, because you're artificially making yourself faster, for one, and you're artificially raising your hips and raising your butt, because fins are made to float. So it's like attaching a pool buoy and a propeller to your feet. So for your normal workouts, no, I'm not a fan of fins, but there's a place for them. When you're learning to kick, most people tend to kick from their knees, which is not how you're supposed to kick. Your kick should start at your core and your hips and then work its way down. Fins kind of force that out of you, you know, force you to engage up in the hip area. So if you're working on learning how to kick, fins are great. Or I use them for active recovery. Like, I do this workout that'll be each interval is 900 yards, which is pretty long, but I'll do 300 at this pace, 300 a little faster, 300 a little faster. And then I need about 2 minutes in between, because it turns into a 900-yard really hard interval. So then I'll throw on my fins and do like an easy 200. It stretches me back out, lets me catch my breath. You know, so it's allowing me to recover, but keep moving and stay active. So in that case, fins can be great. It would be like using your pool buoy for recovery. right? It's another method of active recovery while in the pool. So I always take fins with me. They're in my bag. They go to the pool with me. I don't always use them, but I do use them. But they should not be like the regular training aid in the pool every workout.
So what do you think about swim toys? Just talking in the same vein about this, and should you be using those as to warm up and as part of your routine?
So when we did the bike discussion, I said that there's two ways of using, we were talking about power meters. Said you have toys and you have tools, and it's all in how you use it. And the same thing applies here. My bag has two sets of paddles. I have one set of paddles that's your normal paddle. It's kind of shaped like your hand, and it's more for engaging more water and doing more strength. It builds your upper back and your shoulders and things like that. The other pair of paddles I have are shaped kind of like a triangle. They're very narrow. There's only room for one finger on them, and they actually have a little rudder on the bottom, and they generate no extra speed or power whatsoever. But if my hand enters the water in the wrong place, I will lose the paddle. So I use those warming up, slowing down, just to keep myself engaging the water as I should. So I carry two sets of paddles. I have a pull buoy, which is great for recovery or warming up, or, if you're doing a new distance, say, you're stepping up from, just as an example, let's say you're stepping up from a half to a full where the swim distance actually doubles. That is very daunting. So going and doing 4,000 in the pool can be scary for a lot of people, but if you add some pull buoy into that, it's allowing you to get the muscular adaptation in the upper body and the volume, but it's not near as difficult as it would be to swim the entire thing freestyle. So pull buoy is good. I also use a band that goes around my ankles, which is like the thing that swimmers hate or non-swimmers hate more than anything, because it forces your legs to sink, because then you can't kick. But it's great for me. I have lower back issues, so I tend to slack when I swim with my kick and stuff like that. The band forces me to engage my core, engage my lower back muscles, and get my hips and my feet up. Because otherwise I'll swim shaped like a letter L, and then I'm not going anywhere. It also forces you to turn your arms over faster, because since you can't kick, you have to generate the momentum somewhere else. And then I do carry the fins. So I have a bag. It's got tools. I don't use them every swim. The pull buoy, I use probably 75% of my swims. Paddles about the same, and a lot of times I'll use them together so that I can just focus on the paddle portion of the swim. I'll use my pull buoy, then I don't have to worry about kicking, or it all depends on the specific workout, but there are uses for them. You just don't want to use them as a crutch.
So let's now take this and look at pool swimming and its correlation really to open water, since it's really a completely different thing. How do you go from one to the other?
So on the surface, swimming is swimming, right? And so the general concept of it is the same. The biggest issue there's two big issues people run into. Issue one is people freak out when they can't see the bottom, right? You get in water, you can't see your feet, can't see what's going on. And so there's a sense of uneasiness with that. And the only real way to break that is to do it more and more and more, right? Preferably if you can get into a group setting, practice swim, something like that with people that you know. Or like out here, we have a park called Hammerman Park that we swim in a river. You can't see the bottom, but everybody can stand up. The water's 4 feet deep, so you're never truly out in the open, so to speak, so for that, it's really just kind of a practice thing. If you have issues like that and you're going into a race, I always tell people to get in the water before the race starts, if they'll allow it. get your face in the water, get wet, do a couple strokes. You kind of get the nervousness out of you. Instead of sitting there treading water, they say go, you take 10 strokes, and then you start to kind of freak out. The second big issue is open water isn't flat, and it's not calm, and there's currents and tides even in a river or a lake. If you're in a dammed lake, there's still a current in the lake because the water has to go from the dam to an outlet point. You may not think it's there, but it's there. When you swim in the pool and you're a glider type swimmer, and then you get into water where the water is actually fighting against you, it becomes really hard to swim. So that's where having that shorter turnover pays huge dividends, because if you're a glider and the water's working against you, every time you're not taking a stroke, you're slowing down. Versus if you're taking strokes, you're at least maintaining a consistent effort. It's really helpful when the water's choppy to take a shorter stroke, because it's, you know, if you're going up and down and the water's rolling and things like that, every time you go up, you are almost coming to a stop if you're not taking a swim stroke. So that's one of those things where practicing the higher turnover in the pool will really pay off when you get into open water. Now, there are some races, like I did Beach to Battleship a few years ago, which is a down current swim, that I knew that I had a 140-mile day ahead of me and the water was pushing me. I was gliding my butt off. You know, because I wasn't fighting anything. I was on an escalator that was taking me where I needed to go. So I was taking my time and having fun, and I got out of the water 2.4 miles. I swam, I think, like a 51 and didn't even feel like I did anything. And I was like, this is great. So in that case, sure. But that's the exception and not the rule that you're going to get a swim like that. The third thing comes with people in open water is breathing, right? In the pool, it's very rare that you're getting a mouthful of water unless you're doing something wrong. In open water, because it's not the pool, you have to learn how to breathe effectively. And that can mean any number of things. Instead of breathing every 2 strokes, you're breathing every 4 because it didn't allow it. Or a big one is when it's choppy, what a lot of people don't know how to do is time your breathing when you're going up on top of as the water's rolling. You don't want to turn your face into the wave and try to take a breath, but you can feel that you're rocking while you're swimming. So I'll actually adjust my stroke speed as much as I can to the rhythm of the water so that I am sighting and taking my breaths on top instead of down in the valley of the waves. And so it may mean taking a breath every 2 strokes, or I had to stretch one out to 6 for some reason or whatever. But that just takes practice. You can't simulate that in a pool. So getting out and practicing in open water with friends or things like that will allow you to be able to kind of hone those skills. They don't come naturally. It took me years to develop them, and they're still far from perfect. But so that's just something that takes time.
Do you find that when you do open water trainings, you should be doing some kind of drills while you're in the open water?
It depends on the focus of the swim. We don't swim open water very much here because there's not very many places that it's accessible. We're a coastal state, and we're surrounded by the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, and we have all these lakes. Most of the stuff we're not allowed to swim in, which stinks because we have so much water here that we can't use. So typically, if I'm getting open water, my purpose is to simulate my race, or to get distance in because I can get it in a straight line without hitting a wall every 20 seconds. So for me, no, if I'm getting in the open water, I'm going to swim. However, if you know that your water is going to be choppy and you don't have these skills that we've been discussing, then do some breathing drills. Practice trying to time your swim stroke. That with the roll of the water, that's good. or if you know the water's pushing one way versus the other, when you're going against the current, try different tempos of your arm turnover, because you'll notice a physical difference. It's immediate. It's hard to tell in the pool. You just feel like you're working too hard when you speed your arms up. But in open water, you will immediately notice the difference of picking up your turnover versus not, in terms of how fast everything's moving around you, you know. So if you have regular access to open water, then it's great to be able to do those kind of things and practice them. In our case, we don't really have them. So when we get open water, we're trying to get as much as we can out of it at that time.
So let's talk a little bit about sighting. How many strokes do you feel an athlete should take before they pick their head up?
So it depends on conditions. You know, the choppier it is or the windier it is, if the water's pushing you from the side, obviously you would need to sight more than, say, you're in a flat lake and it's calm and you can just kind of roll. And it also depends on how straight of a swimmer you are. You know, some people have a natural tendency, almost everybody, their arms enter the water a little differently. We're not perfectly symmetrical, right? You have an imbalance of strength and weakness, that kind of stuff. So most people tend to go a little left or a little right or whatever. And that can affect your timing for sighting as well. If I'm in good water, you know, that's not interrupting me, or say I'm in a race and I'm on a good set of feet, I'm drafting off of somebody, usually the pace I swim, if I can draft off of somebody, I know they're a swimmer. So I don't really have to worry about their sighting abilities so much. So I can take way more strokes between my own sighting because I'm counting on them to be leading the way. But if it's just me and the water's flat, I will sight about every 20 strokes. So I'll count to 10 on one side and then I'll sight. If the water's choppy, I'll cut that like in half. Or if I'm in a big cluster of people, then a lot of times I'll do like almost like a lifeguard swim, where your head's, every time I'm bringing my arm up to breathe, I'm looking as I'm doing it, because you're trying to deal with the mass of people and get around and things like that. So it's really condition dependent.
So Ray brings up a good question. So when you're at a race, it's like a battlegrounds, right? That's the swimming is probably the worst part of it, because everybody's kind of like kicking and, you know, frailing, whatever. And he says, do you have any strategies for dealing with the crowds at the start of the wave and when you come up to swimmers from the previous wave?
Sure. So there's two different types of people in swimming. There are the people who avoid contact, and there are the people who care about contact. And a lot of that has to do with general comfort in the water or your own personal swimming ability. Like, I used to avoid contact like the plague. I started at the back of my wave, no matter what. What I would do is when the horn would go off or the gun or whatever, I would count to 5 before I started swimming, because then you instantly have separation from the mass of people ahead of you. Now that I'm more of a front pack, closer to a front pack swimmer, I'm lining up near the front, and when the horn goes off, we all accelerate as hard as we possibly can to create space. So it depends on where you are in that mix. What I always say is, if you're uncomfortable, then starting near the back and counting to 5 or 10 or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. 5 seconds is not going to cost you anything in your race, versus if you start in the middle of a pack and somebody knocks your goggles and you have to stop and reset them, that's going to cost you at least 5 seconds. So if you can do that and be more comfortable, that's great. The other thing you can look for is, you can take it to the bank at every race that when you get in the water, if it's an in-water start and you look at the group, everybody is lining up on the buoy line, right? Because everybody wants the shortest route to the buoys. Line up to the outside of those people. There will be no one there. And by the time, and then you can still take a straight line to the buoy. They swim an extra 10 yards, maybe, if you swim a straight line compared to those people. But by the time you get to the turn, they will have stretched out into, you know, a drafting line or smaller groups instead of 50 people at one time. And then it makes it way more manageable. You get around that turn, and then you can get on the buoy line with everybody else. As far as dealing with the waves ahead of you, the big thing that is not spoken about in triathlon that is perfectly allowed in the rules and no one discusses is you can go inside of the buoys as long as they are not turns. So the sight buoys that are in between your turns, there is no rule that says you have to stay outside of them. Most people do because they're trying to swim a straight line, right? And so that's natural. If I start in a later wave, I will turn around a turn and I'll instantly move to the inside because there's never anyone there. And I can roll right by them. And then as I'm getting out to the next turn, then I'll work my way back out to take the turn. It is allowed in USAT rules. It's allowed in WTC, which is Ironman rules. It is 100% allowed, but hardly anyone ever does it. And I highly recommend it if you want to avoid the crowds.
That's a great suggestion. Any other tips for open water that we should be aware of?
The biggest thing I can, like I said, the biggest thing for open water is to in open water. Now relating to the packs and the comfort of kind of beating and banging and things like that, one of the things we do at like our training camps is we'll put 3 people side by side in a swim lane at the pool and have them swim down and back side by side. You're not swimming fast, but the lanes are only so wide. So you're going to bump, you're going to rub shoulders, things like that are going to happen. It is a way to practice the contact in a much more controlled environment. Otherwise, it's really just get in as much open water time as you can to get comfortable in it.
So let's talk about breathing, right? I tend to just breathe on one side. I don't really do bilateral breathing, but the question here on the table is how important is bilateral breathing for open water swimming?
So I breathe to my left. And that's mostly because I can't turn my head far enough to my right to take a breath due to some injuries when I was younger. So I breathe to my left, and I tend to swim just fine. For newer swimmers, bilateral breathing is great because it teaches you balance. There's amount of balance required to be able to take a breath on either side. So it's great for creating balance. It also tends to make you swim straighter. It also can allow you, if you're in open water and say the water is really choppy and it's coming at you from the side and not from head on, you can turn away from the waves to breathe, which is great because then your body is sheltering you. You don't have to worry about taking water in, things like that. It is a great tool. It is not a necessary thing to do in every swim. Like if you watch the Olympics, they all breathe to one side. Swimmers in the Olympics, they can breathe to both sides, and oftentimes they'll change depending on which direction they're going, and it's because they're trying to look at the people next to them, but they only breathe to one side. Open water, high-level open water swimmers, if the water's not choppy, they tend to breathe to one side because they're more comfortable on one side or another. So it's a great tool to have in your toolbox for in the event that the conditions warrant it. So it's great to practice, and it will help make you a more well-rounded swimmer. But if the conditions don't warrant it, then you will probably still be better off swimming and breathing to your more comfortable side.
Okay, good. And one more question from me. I wanted to ask you about wetsuits. Does it matter what brand wetsuit you wear? I mean, I know Roka is our sponsor, but does it really matter? You know, can you do Blue 7? I mean, or is there one particular wetsuit that makes you go faster?
Sure. So the two biggest brands that everybody knows is Xterra and Roka, right? Xterra was the biggest wetsuit brand for a decade. Most of that is because they had all the partnerships, they had the most advertising, things like that. I swam in Xterra suits for years because they were the most popular. I now swim in Roka suits, not so much because of the popularity as it is for me. It's the material's different. They're more thin in the shoulders, which is great. I have a surgically repaired right shoulder, so anything that doesn't create stress on my shoulder is a plus. As far as one brand being better than the other or anything like that, not really. Of the big brands, Blue 70, Tier, Roka, out of all those guys, if the similarly priced wetsuits across the brands all work about the same performance-wise. There are little things that I like about other brands, of some brands more than others. One of the things I like about Roka suits is that everybody gets wetsuit chafing, right, on your neck. Well, Roka came up with this stupidly ingenious idea that nobody had thought of, to put the hard part of the Velcro on the back of the suit instead of on the strap. I got a Roka suit, my chafing problems went away. And it doesn't cost any more. It was just a simple, one little thing that they do that I like. I swam in a Blue 70 Helix suit, and I felt like, for me personally, I felt like I was on top of the water. It was a little too much buoyancy for me. Like, I felt like I couldn't actually get in the water and swim. So like Xterra, in my opinion, is the best bargain wetsuit out there, best bang for the buck. You're never going to beat their pricing in terms of, for someone getting a first wetsuit or something like that. You will never beat it. As far as the more top end brands go, a $400 suit from these three guys are all going to work about the same. They're going to fit a little different, and they'll have some little differences, but most people aren't even going to notice any performance difference across them as long as they're in the same price point.
So the next question is, when you're practicing in open water, should you swim without a wetsuit so that you get a boost when you're racing?
It depends. Swimming in a wetsuit is a skill in its own. Most people don't like wetsuit. People that don't like wetsuits tend to not like them because they feel claustrophobic in them. So, or some suits have a higher neckline, and so it feels kind of like it's choking you, things like that. If the water is wetsuit, in a temperature that is wetsuit comfortable, for me is about 75 and under in open water, I'll wear my wetsuit. And that's because I don't get a lot of time in it. If the water's above 75, I won't wear it just because I'll get hot. If I'm racing, that's one thing. I have up to 78 if it's not an Ironman branded race. I'm trying to get that extra speed. So in a race, I would wear it. In practice, I wouldn't, just because I want to stay cooler. If I'm trying to simulate a wetsuit feel, I have those, wetsuit shorts. Blue 70 makes them, Xterra makes them, Roka makes them. And it'll float my legs similar to a wetsuit, but it'll keep me cooler. So it'll allow me to do it, because the body position is a little different in a wetsuit. Shoulder mobility is a little more limited in a wetsuit. So there is good reason to practice in one, because it does feel different than swimming in the pool. So it's more temperature dependent for me.
So that leads me to another question about swim skins versus the shorts that you were talking about. Should you use those shorts in the pool?
I use them sometimes when like I said, I have back issues. When my back is giving me a fit, I will wear them because it will allow me to do my workout as it was intended, because it just takes a little bit of stress off of my back. For my clients, if they have them, if they're doing something long, like say we're coming into a race week and I'll have them do like a continuous 1,000 or 1,500, something that's straight through. It's very rare, but in the case of something like that, then yeah, it's okay to wear them for something like that, because it does takes a little bit of the pressure off, makes it, because you're just trying to get that time in the water. You should not wear them every time you get in the pool, because it works like a crutch, just like a pool buoy or anything else does.
Mhm.
There's this famous thing. So Dave Scott, who a lot of people know is one of the, was a 6-time Kona winner, is in the Hall of Fame. He lives out in Boulder, Colorado. He's a master's instructor at one of the local pools there. And you can literally just go in and jump in a lane in Dave Scott's class, and it's the craziest thing in the world. If you show up with those shorts on, he will kick you out. Like, he will not let you in the pool, because they're a crutch. So there is a time for them, but they should be used very sparingly. I actually have mine for 2 reasons. 1, for my back, and 2, for if the water is, say, 77, almost 70, almost wetsuit legal, that is too hot for me. I will race in the shorts, because it'll give me some buoyancy and a little bit of speed, but I won't overheat.
Do you really think that you get speed out of wearing a wetsuit versus not wearing a wetsuit? I mean,
Absolutely.
for me, I feel like I go faster when I'm not wearing a wetsuit, but
So what I find
I'm not doing something right.
What I find is people who grew up swimming tend to not like wetsuits. They tend to not get an advantage from a wetsuit because they already have good body position, good form, good technique. So what they gain from a wetsuit is very small. Versus people who learn to swim as adults, the added buoyancy fixes any body position issues. It helps that you have a terrible kick, so now you don't have to keep yourself up. It's all about propulsion and not balance at that point. So I swim maybe 5 to 10 seconds, 100 faster in a wetsuit than without.
Wow.
So, and that's me as a decent swimmer. So the slower you are, the more benefit you gain from the wetsuit. Swim skins, on the other hand, totally different.
Any other questions before we wrap this up?
While we're waiting to see, I will touch on swim skins. You had started to ask about it, and then it kind of went off because another question came through. You'll see when there's non-open water or non-wetsuit legal swims, some people in swim skins, some people in just their tri-suits, things like that. Swim skins do not make you float. They do not add buoyancy. They do not do anything like that that's going to make you faster. All they do is they compress you in the water. So you punch a little hole, a smaller hole in the water, and they also clean up anything that would create drag, like pockets on your suit or anything like that. So they do make you a little faster. It is not as a result of the suit as much as it just kind of cleans up all the lines and makes you more hydrodynamic. So it would be the last thing that I would suggest someone buy to add to like their race kit type stuff. I have one only because I've been doing this a long time and eventually I got one. But sometimes I don't wear it. It really depends. So that is definitely not something that you really need in your arsenal.
Okay, good. Well, this was excellent. So thank you so much, Coach Tim, for doing this and teaching us all about open water and pool swimming. We really appreciate it. And thank you guys for joining in, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys. Have a good day.